Bibliophiles of the internet. Today I'm here to talk about the 5 books that most surprised me in 2022. Now this is distinct from my best books of 2022 list, which I've already shared with you. I put hours and hours of work and thought into that video, so you should definitely check it out if you haven't yet. It will be included down below in the description box. So if anything, you can think about the books I'm chatting about today as honorable mentions in a way. A few of my favorite books of the year definitely were very pleasant surprises, but I wanted to sort of challenge myself to show some love for books that were not already on that list. Starting off strong, my first surprising read from last year was Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Cosby. I will give you a brief synopsis for each of these. So this is a crime thriller about Bug, whose father was a getaway driver, and he himself was also a getaway driver in his youth. But now he's left that life behind, he has his own family, and he's an above-board mechanic. However, he's experiencing a lot of financial hardship, and he's lured into this heist out of desperation. It's supposed to be just one last job, stealing a bunch of diamonds that should leave him set for life. But far too late, he realizes that this jewelry store is a front for something much, much worse. As an eclectic reader, I don't personally subscribe to the concept of comfort zones because books in general are my comfort zone. There's no genre or subgenre that especially brings me discomfort. I don't exclude any genre from the conversation. I have read most things at least once, or I would read most things at least once. That said, I don't read a huge amount of thrillers. I have read some in the past, and especially those that are blended with other genres, but as far as straight up and down contemporary thrillers, I can definitely say I don't often reach for those. With good reason, but that's a separate conversation. But this definitely felt like it was right up my alley. It's a high-octane thriller that combines heist elements and also social commentary coming from the perspective of a black, blue-collar working man who's struggling financially and culturally in a small town, and I think all of those layers really made for the perfect storm, so to speak. I've mentioned this before, but the first chapter of this book is textbook. It is the perfect opener to the story that instantly grabs your attention, establishes the stakes and the characters in a way that the reader will not forget, and effectively sets the tone for the entire book. The voice is also a huge part of why this story still stands out to me almost a year afterwards. The narrative voice itself is distinctive and undeniable, but the audiobook narrator, Adam Lazar-White, is also such an incredible talent. Just this one book sold me on him as a voice actor for life. I think he's done all of S.A. Cosby's books to date, and I intend to listen to any other S.A. Cosby books as audiobooks just for his performance. That's kind of a tangent, but the listening experience is so tied up to my personal experience with this book that I just had to mention it. But this was such a gritty, intense, captivating story. It definitely turned me on to S.A. Cosby's work, and I absolutely plan to listen to Razorblade Tears sometime in 2023. Next, I want to talk about The Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes by Cat Sebastian. You might be surprised that this was surprising for me because I love Cat Sebastian and I love The Queer Principles of Kit Webb, which is the first book in this queer historical romance companion series. But that's almost what made me go into it with somewhat leveled expectations. Taking a step back, The Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes is a queer historical romance between two bisexual characters, Marion and Rob, who are both very bad at being criminals. Rob is a thief and a con artist, and the story starts when he discovers something scandalous about Marion and writes her to basically blackmail her, hoping she will pay him a sum of £500 to keep her secrets. But Marion not only has some very strong opinions about Rob's horrible blackmailing technique, but she also has bigger things to worry about because she just shot her dastardly husband and soon finds herself on the run. And Rob, her affectionate blackmailer, might turn out to be the only one who can come to her assistance. Now again, when I say this book surprised me, I don't mean that I went into it expecting to hate it, and the fact that I very much did not is what was surprising to me, so we can take that off the table. In fact, we can take that off the table for all of these books. But I just wasn't sure whether this would work as a companion series. By that I mean that I loved Kit Webb so much, and I thought it functioned so well as a standalone. I wasn't sure what the other characters and what the rest of the world might offer, which is why I went into this with an open mind and really no expectations, and it blew me away just as much. Both this book and Kit Webb are very much self-contained stories. The events of this book don't change or negate the events of book 1, and Marion and Rob are also delightfully hilarious characters. Reading their story brought me so much joy. The banter is top-notch, the story is rife with chaos and shenanigans, there's a continuation of the whole eat the rich theme this series has going on, so really, what's not to like? I'm glad I read this, and I'm glad I'm talking about it now because I know Cat Sebastian has such a rich backlist, much of which I own either physically or on my e-reader, that I really want to get to. So even talking about this is a good reminder that those stories exist. The next book I want to talk about is High Risk Homosexual by Edgar Gomez. Edgar Gomez is a queer, gender-expansive Nicaraguan and Puerto Rican-American writer. This is their memoir about their childhood, coming out, and really coming to terms with their various experiences of queerness despite the machismo-centric culture they were socialized within their entire life. This was surprising to me simply because I had no idea it existed until a few weeks before I read it. I first heard Edgar Gomez as a guest on the Gender Reveal podcast, which is a great trans podcast that really spotlights trans figures, authors, creators, thinkers, activists, academics, and all of their amazing work. So they were a guest on the show, and hearing them talk about their memoir and everything that went into it, including the work of remembering, the labor of unearthing your own personal trauma, the social gymnastics of writing vulnerably about your family and your past, was just really profound. There was humor, there was insight, there was pain about what they shared in that episode, but as a queer and non-cis Latina person myself, I just felt really connected to their experiences. Machismo especially is a very Latina-specific concept. That's not to say that toxic masculinity and patriarchy doesn't manifest itself in its own special ways across cultures. It definitely does. But machismo is such a specific topic, and to hear about it from a queer Latina person assigned male at birth and socialized as male really brought a lot of important nuances to the forefront. Because there's not only the socialization aspect, but also ultimately the rejection of machismo and what that looked like for Edgar Gomez. So again, I listened to this one on audio, and that listening experience is inherently tied to my perception of this book. It really felt like I was spending time with a friend, like I was replaying a very long voicemail from someone I knew and cared about very deeply. And if I had never tuned into that gender reveal episode, I would not have had that experience. Penultimately, I have to mention What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This is a queer horror novella. It is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, following a retired trans soldier, Alex Easton, who receives a strange letter from his childhood friend saying that this friend's younger sister, Madeline, is very ill and possibly in her final days. So Alex goes racing to the decrepit Usher Manor, and what Ka finds there is not only a friend with a horrible case of nerves, but a sleepwalking and hallucinating Madeline, as well as a strange lake that eerily pulses at night. Again, the experience of reading this book really stands out to me. I listened to it all in one day, and in the same day that I reread/re-listened to The Fall of the House of Usher. I have read the story before. I was a little bit of a Poe aficionado in middle school, weirdly enough, but it was my first time listening to it. So the drama of listening to that really fantastic audio production was intense and revitalizing to the story in some ways, and then I immediately dove into this more recent, more expansive imagining of that same story, and it was just a really immersive experience. This was surprising to me because it's so different from the source, but it still honors all these different images and symbols from Poe's original vision, but then repurposes them in new and exciting ways that actually really work. The story really delivers on the atmosphere, the creepiness and tension lurking beneath all the details, the character work, and there's also a really surprising amount of humor that works well to balance out the darkness. I feel like by reading this very short book, I got a great sense of who T. Kingfisher is as an author. I immediately went out and bought 2 more of her books after this. I also have an arc of her upcoming book as well that I'm super excited for. I just love that this novella really effectively introduced me to her work and her voice. And finally, I could not make this list of surprising books without including The Best Bad Things by Catrina Carrasco. This is a backlist, queer, historical Latina noir mystery thriller type story about Alma, who is a Mexican-American covert operative highly trained in the art of espionage. She's especially known for going undercover, for being a master of disguise, and she has this especially bad habit of disguising herself as a man, which people in 1887 don't really like. That actually got her fired from her last job, and now she finds herself working on the West Coast under Delphine, who runs the West Coast smuggling ring operation. When product suddenly goes missing at a local outpost, Alma is put in charge of recovering those drugs and tracking down the culprit at all costs. It has been literal months since I read this book, and it has not left my brain for a single second. It was definitely surprising for me because, again, I had no idea it existed until days before I picked it up. When I found out this was bisexual Latina historical genre fiction that had somehow flown under my radar, I could not rest until it was in my grimy little hands. This was another high-octane, exciting, addictive story. I love the way it was written in a way that seems somewhat simplistic on the surface, but has so many layers the more you dig into it and really think about it. I was also pleasantly surprised by how the story uses gender bending to excavate not only queerness, but also a little bit of gender exploration as well. Even though Alma doesn't put any sort of label on herself, there's definitely some gender coding in here, and I love how it's so seamlessly and organically woven into the thematic overtones. It kind of reminded me a little bit of The Gods of Tango in that way, which I'm sure many of you know is one of my all-time favorite books. I do want to point out though that The Gods of Tango is much more explicit in its explorations of transness. But there's just such a deep feeling of catharsis for me when I read about Latina characters in historical stories coming into their queerness, not despite the historical and social context, but rather because of it. There was so much about this that I loved. It gave me action, mystery, seduction, romance, explosivity in every sense of the word. Again, once I knew it existed, everything just perfectly fell into place. So those are just 5 books that took me by surprise in 2022 for very different reasons. I hope you add them to your own TBRs and feel free to tell me about a book that surprised you down below in the comments. But that is everything I had to share for today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.